Hello everybody, and welcome to chapter number 1 for microeconomics pertaining to limits, alternatives, and choices. We're going to go through the various fundamental concepts of microeconomics in this chapter. We're going to start off looking at the economic perspective, some theories, principles, and models, the difference between micro and macroeconomics, an individuals' and society's economizing problem, what's known as the production possibilities model, and also unemployment, growth, and the future. So economics is a social science which is concerned about making optimal choices under the conditions of scarcity. Resources are finite and scarce, and as a consequence we need to make choices that optimally use them. And economic wants by rule exceed society's productive capacity. Think of it as unlimited wants to limited means. So the economic perspective is a viewpoint that envisions individuals and institutions making rational decisions in their own self-interest. And what we mean by this is the following. We expect people to operate in a rational manner and buy the goods and services which they want and find useful, and people will make the goods and services that consumers want to buy. And it considers things like scarcity and choice. Once again, resources are finite, opportunity cost, or what you give up to make something else, and people are going to act in a way to increase their own utility. In economics, utility is a notion of what you get from a good or a service. And finally, we're going to compare marginal benefits, or the additional benefit we get from something, to the additional cost we would incur, or marginal cost. So resources are scarce and we have to make choices. And an opportunity cost in economics is what we give up to pursue something else. If you choose to get pizza for dinner instead of a hamburger, your opportunity cost would be how much you would have enjoyed the hamburger, for instance. And there's no free lunch. No matter what you do, you're going to have to give up something when you make a choice. We would say that consumers operate in what is known as rational self-interest. And rational self-interest is the notion that people are going to act in a way that is beneficial to them, and both on consumers and producers. Individuals and businesses make rational decisions that will hopefully make them money and make them better off. And under this notion, the goal is to maximize utility. It doesn't mean we're selfish or make wrong decisions, but the goal is we want to act in a way that we buy the things we want, we produce the things that our consumers want, and if we do that, everybody is going to be happy. You're going to be profitable, people will get the goods and services they demand, and that's our desired outcome here. So people don't make decisions for no reason, they make decisions with a desired outcome. And what we do in economics is called marginal analysis, where we compare marginal benefits to marginal costs. If the additional cost of making more of something is greater than the benefit, we wouldn't do that. If the additional benefit is greater than the cost, we would. So once again, people act in a rational way. If you say something like something's not worth it, well, in that case, you're saying cost is greater than benefit. So in economics, we use things like the scientific method. You've probably incorporated this before in various classes, but we come up with some sort of a theory or a hypothesis after making observations, and then we test it. And then either we go ahead with it, reject it, modify it, or continue to test it. So in economics, we're constantly refining what we believe and what we think. It's a constantly changing science. Economic principles, one thing we do when we look at varying something in an economic sense is what is known as the other things held equal assumption, or the Latin phrase ceteris paribus. And this is the assumption that factors other than those being considered did not change. And we can express this graphically. So we can vary something, and generally, if we want to vary something, we hold everything else constant to see the effect of what we're actually varying. Now, this is a microeconomics class. You may have taken macroeconomics with me before, or taken a macroeconomics course. And macroeconomics is where we study the entire economy, and in this course in microeconomics, we're going to study individual consumers, firms, or markets. We have two types of economic statements which we can make going forward. One of them is known as positive economics, and those are economic statements which are factual. And the other is known as normative economics, which are economic statements involving value judgments. So anytime we say what ought to be or put our own opinion into something, that would be normative economics. Whereas if we go, the GDP rate is this, or the unemployment rate is this, or inflation is this, those are all positive statements, measured with numbers, measured with facts. Now remember, economics tries to take into account what is known as the economizing problem, where people have limited income and unlimited wants. Think of your income and then all of the things you want to buy, and as a consequence you have to make a budget. You have to buy the goods and services you can afford and the combinations you can afford that are going to be beneficial to you. And there are both attainable and unattainable combinations. Trade-offs and opportunity costs, and finally choices and income changes. So if we look here, a consumer can buy the difference between movies and books, and if this consumer has $120 to spend, anywhere along the blue line is attainable. Anywhere below the blue line, which I'm going to highlight here, is attainable as well. You're not spending all your money. Anywhere out here is more money than you have. So for that $120, you can come up with any combination of t-shirts and books. That's a glitch on the slides. That should say t-shirts and books, not movies and books. So anywhere along the line, the numbers are correct. Anywhere along the line is attainable, we're using all our money. Anywhere inside the line, we're not using all our money. Anywhere outside the line is beyond our budget. And if we look here, here's just a selection of average income per person in various countries as of 2020. So the United States is quite high, not the highest. We do have the largest overall economy, but we also have a larger population than countries like Switzerland or Norway, which have a larger per capita income. That's if you take a country's entire income and divide it by their population. So when we look at society, and what happens when we look at society? Well, society has what's known as an economizing problem. And there are four categories of economic resources in society, and those are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial ability. Land is all of your land resources, so literal land, and also things like your building or forests or mines or anything like that. Those are land resources. Labor is the labor or the man hours that your employees put in. Capital is capital goods or human-produced physical objects and ideas used in production, ranging from things like intellectual property to factories and machinery and equipment and vehicles. Those are all capital goods. Goods that are human-produced and used in the production process. And finally, entrepreneurial ability is a human resource we consider distinct from labor, because to be an entrepreneur, to be someone who founds a business, you need to be very risk tolerant, and that is why we consider it something unique from labor. Capital is always also an investment good. Money is not a capital good. We will look at the role of money in economics in a little bit in this class, but money is not a capital good. Money is a means to capital goods, but not a good in itself. Entrepreneurs employ the other factors of production, and that's why we consider them separate. To be an entrepreneur, you have to be very risk tolerant. You have to take initiative, make strategic decisions, innovate, and most important, take risk. All of the entrepreneurs that you know, the Bill Gateses and the Jeff Bezoses and the Elon Musks, those are all the famous ones who obviously made billions of dollars by taking risks and innovating. But there are untold numbers of entrepreneurs who weren't successful. To be an entrepreneur, you have to be very risk tolerant. And something we will look at as we go through this course is what is known as the production possibilities model. And in its simplest form, it shows different combinations of two goods that an economy can produce. So in this case, we're looking a bit at a macroeconomic sense. And our assumptions here are full employment, fixed resources, fixed technology, and the balance between consumer and capital goods. So in this case, this economy can make a combination of pizzas and industrial robots. Pizzas are an example of a consumer good, which is something for the here and now, whereas robots are a capital good, something that we can use to grow our economy in the future. No economy makes nothing but consumer or capital goods. Every real economy is a mix, because you need some goods for the here and now so people can buy things, and you also need goods for the future as well. And as we move along that line, anywhere along the curve is attainable and we're using our full economy. Anywhere below the blue line is also attainable, but it means that we are not operating efficiently. And anywhere in the white space, like point W, what that means is it is not attainable in our current economy. Just like before with the budget line. There is what's known as the law of increasing opportunity cost, and as more of a good is produced, its marginal opportunity cost increases. And this is what's known as our production possibilities curve, which we looked at on the previous slide. That's the reason it has a concave shape and it's not a straight line. It becomes harder and harder to keep making more of something. As you divert more and more of your economy from one good to the other, or from consumer to capital goods, it's going to be more and more difficult to keep increasing the quantity. So generally, we will produce something where the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost. In this case, if we're looking at pizza, point E, where these two lines cross, is exactly where we would make pizza up to. That's at 200,000 pizzas right here, and at a cost of $10. Meaning, if we make one more pizza beyond this point, it's going to cost more, or the red line, than our benefit, the blue line. And if we make less, it's going to be more benefit than cost. So we would produce something up to the exact point where cost equals benefit. An additional pizza, there would be no change at this point. Whereas if we made one more, you would have more cost than benefit, one less, more benefit than cost. As the economy grows, combinations which were previously unattainable, like that point in the white space, can become attainable, because the whole production possibilities curve moves outwards. So in this case, we went from our original curve to a new one, where now we can make more pizzas and robots at all possible combinations, and this is what's known as economic growth. We'll look at some of the things which drive economic growth later on in this class. Now if we look here, once again, focusing more on capital goods will give you more growth in the future, more on consumer goods, less. However, you can't just simply make capital goods, because that would mean you would have nothing to buy in stores. All of the things we buy on a daily basis, those are all consumer goods. So generally, most of the goods we buy are present goods. We're not buying industrial equipment or anything like that. And this is just a global perspective. If we look here, gross fixed capital formation is a percentage of national income. So countries vary widely in the percentage of their respective national incomes they devote to investment in capital goods. So China by far is investing most heavily in capital goods. It makes sense. They're a manufacturing powerhouse. Shortly behind them, South Korea, India, Sweden, France, Chile. United States is pretty high. It's over 20%, but nowhere near as much as China, which is over 40%. The more of a manufacturing-based economy we are looking at, generally, the more capital goods a country is going to produce. As for international trade, we're going to look more on trade later on in this class, but trade allows economies to specialize, make the things they are best suited to make, and then trade with other countries that make goods and services that they're best suited to make. And what does this do? Well, this is going to increase production possibilities for all. And on our last slide here, when we start looking at economic perspective and data, some things to avoid, things like biases, loaded terms, various fallacious data, and correlation but not causation. We're going to look into all of this. One common thread is it's very easy to mislead people with numbers and not flat out lie. but tell something that isn't necessarily the truth. The numbers are real, but you're using them in a way that isn't intended. And be very wary of any data that is outwardly biased or has loaded words in it or shows correlations that are meaningless. We're going to go into all of this later on in the course. So that is going to take us to the end of chapter 1. And for anybody who requires it, the last few slides in this chapter beyond this slide are the accessible slides, which contain text alternatives to the images you may see in the slides. And all of the slides which we use in this course are accessible. So that's going to take us to the end of chapter 1 for microeconomics.